bringing people together in a city that desperately needs models of how people from different racial backgrounds can coexist in a productive, constructive way. That's what Los Angeles should be about. So, again and again, many other examples, we have stood up for people who need us because no one else is standing up for them. I wrote California's law requiring the microstamping of handguns. The issue of gun violence is a very personal issue for me, and it should be a much more personal issue throughout our region, our state, and our nation.
A lawsuit against Wells Fargo by the city of Los Angeles. Wells Fargo employees opening roughly 1.5 million bank accounts that were never requested by customers.
Every consumer needs to trust their bank.
So the man who got the legal ball rolling on all of this, LA City Attorney Mike Feuer.
Los Angeles City Attorney Mike Feuer could have taken the easy road. As a graduate of Harvard Law School, he watched the vast majority of his classmates move into high-paying corporate law careers at blockbuster megafirms. But Feuer was raised under a different set of core values and decided on a path that only 4% of Harvard Law graduates ever choose: public then government service.
I've tried to express in the work that I do a value that my father taught me. He was in Stalag 17 when he was in World War II. He was captured by the Nazis and endured some horrible conditions. He emerged from that telling me, as I grew up, I decided to do the most important work in the world. And when we used to talk, it was clear that a lesson I was to take from those conversations was that it's incumbent on each of us in some facet of our lives to find that most important work. Some of the most important work in my life was done when I ran Bet Tzedek. The title of the organization is House of Justice. Bet Tzedek means House of Justice in Hebrew. Because people came to us 50,000 times when I ran Bet Tzedek because they were confronting the most difficult problem they'd ever faced. They were losing their house or their health care. They're being ripped off in some consumer scam. They were Holocaust survivors seeking restitution from the German government, and they would come with a stencil in their arm from the time that they spent in a concentration camp. They had nowhere else to turn, and they had no money. Now, I don't know about you, but if I were in that situation, if my house were on the line or my health care were on the line, and I had no nickels to get a lawyer, I would feel this is the biggest crisis in my life. And at Bet Tzedek, to be able to reach out to our clients and say, we're here for you, we don't want any money from you, we just want to vindicate what's just, and to save people's homes and to prevent people from being unlawfully evicted and for making sure people have the health care they're entitled to, and doing an array of other programs that change the lives of our clients forever. It was one of the most fulfilling things I have ever done. And the reason I went to law school, and I went to law school because it seemed to me that if one knew the law, one could lift up people who had no one else, give them a voice, whether it was purely as a lawyer or as a public official. And that proved to be true, but Bet Tzedek really got me started at the very earliest stages of my career in that direction.
Tonight, the sheriff here revealing the worsening toll, at least 59 now dead. More than 500
those victims may be on their way out of this building, that three-story building right there on the campus of Marjorie Stoneman.
One of the children who spoke at our press event, a survivor of Parkland, had to rely on the dead body of a student to shield her from being killed herself. Senator Feinstein and leaders from both houses, mental health experts, the kids from Parkland, a parent, a librarian who saved dozens of kids, uniformed law enforcement, standing together, prosecutors, law enforcement, kids, leaders, all to send the same message. There has to be a national assault weapons ban. We need to be sure to sustain this effort so we can assure that moms and kids and families across the United States have what they deserve: safe schools and safe streets for everyone.
A lot of people, when you say the name Mike Feuer, they automatically think gun control.
Sure. Well, let's take a step back for a second. It's too easy to have sort of an antiseptic conversation here in the studio about gun violence. I want to take our viewers to a little different level here. When I was on the city council, two different events sparked my interest in being a leader on gun violence, not just here but across the country. One was when there was a shootout in the Valley, when a bank robbery was occurring, and the robbers had more high-powered weaponry than LAPD did. Later, the North Valley Jewish Community Center shooting happened, where a racist anti-Semite went on a rampage and shot a Filipino-American postal worker simply because he was a person of color. And then he went to the school and he gunned down kids. And it's for me, a very poignant moment for me, because I was on the city council. I heard about that shooting. I made sure my own kids were safe. It was a summertime event. And then I went to the scene, which was in the North Valley, as I mentioned. Went past the police tape, and I found out that a little boy, 5 years old, had been shot, same age as my daughter was at the time. And as an elected official, you know, there's not a big public moment there. I went to the hospital and sat with his parents in a little tiny waiting room just to see if their son would live through the surgery to save his life. And once you do that, the issue of trying to combat gun violence takes on a whole different cast. It's not just some sterile conversation. This is about making sure that no other kid has to suffer that way. So on the city council, I was very proud to write most of the city's most significant laws to prevent gun violence, some of which became the catalyst for changes at the state level.
The Trump administration has reversed course on a number of federal LGBTQ protections. For example, the Obama-era designation prohibiting work discrimination based on gender identity.
We're going to have a panel discussion today on a very provocative topic, and that is a year into President Trump's administration. What has that administration meant for the LGBTQ community? It's going to be a conversation that's wide-ranging, talking about an array of issues that are both important nationally and here in Los Angeles when it comes to protecting and respecting the rights of all of us.
The Trump administration has overturned that position. Never mind, the laws do not protect the LGBT community.
The numbers show, according to a Cal State San Bernardino study, that hate crimes are up in Los Angeles, the highest level in 10 years. Why do you think that is?
I think right now in American society, there has been some normalizing of hate. When the president equates falsely civil rights advocacy with racism, as he did in the wake of the Charlottesville confrontation, it misses a key opportunity and sends a strong signal at the same time. The key opportunity is for leaders to identify ways to bring us together, not to say there were great people on both sides. And it does implicitly send the signal that we're not going to come down too hard on you if you engage in racist or anti-Semitic or homophobic or misogynistic speech or action. So what do we have to do? It cannot be that the loudest voices, the most prevalent voices on social media or in public life are those who would divide us from each other. We all lose when that's true. So I want us to try to identify concrete ways for leaders to step forward and say, we're better than this.
And involve doing what's right and not what is wrong, clearly wrong, like taking money from the NRA to uphold these laws outdated by hundreds of years.
They will see that you are the generation that said, enough is enough and never again. Never again.
You know, we overuse the word tolerance. I do not like that word in this setting because tolerance implies there's something about you that I don't like, but I'll live with it for the sake of harmony. Is that our highest aspiration? I don't think so. Not in the most diverse city in the world. We should be taking advantage of our diversity and using it as a source of enrichment and lifting each other up. We have to do better, and I think we can.
Crafting a responsible budget is about making hard choices. It's about ranking our priorities.
A budget is much more than a spreadsheet. It's really an expression of values. In its best form, it's an expression of values of the people of Los Angeles.
Welcome to the first day of this hearing of the Budget and Finance Committee as we consider the Mayor's proposed budget for fiscal year 2019-2020. I'm Paul Krekorian, Chair of the Committee, joined by...
Hello, I'm Saida Fagan, and welcome to the budget process with Paul Krekorian. Give us an overview of how it all works.
Well, you can imagine with a budget of over $10 billion, there's a lot of hands that are involved in creating this budget. This budget, for the first time in the city's history, has surpassed the $10 billion mark. The process starts with each department making a proposal to the mayor. And the mayor has to make some hard choices then, because each department will invariably want more than the city can afford as a whole. So the mayor has to make a decision about which requests from departments to grant and which not to grant.
So I would ask you to make those investments which will significantly increase our efficiency.
That goes into the mayor's proposed budget.
The mayor has proposed for fiscal year 1920 a $10.6 billion budget.
We're about to approve recommendations that we're going to put before the City Council of Los Angeles for $10 billion in expenditures. That's a monumental task that touches every aspect of the life of people in Los Angeles.
The proposed budget is then submitted to the City Council, and we then have to make decisions about whether or not that proposed budget matches what the Council's priorities are.
We've heard presentations and been able to ask questions of over 30 city departments and bureaus. So we've had a great opportunity to consider this budget at great length.
At the end of all that, the result is a recommendation that we make to the full City Council. And then we start the debate again in the full council. And the result of all of that forceful discussion is that we shape a budget that best serves the interests of all of the people of Los Angeles.
I know the public wants to get involved and will be able to have that opportunity.
The budget process in the Budget and Finance Committee and in Council is absolutely wide open to public participation.
80% of allocations for street homelessness in this budget are for enforcement.
Let's take a serious look at what this money is being used for.
I'm here to voice my support for the renewal of the LA Justice Fund, as the protection of our immigrant community should be a priority that is reflected through our city's budget.
We cannot continue to nickel and dime our Ethics Commission.
$34 million to fix up a building, which you never fixed up.
You will continue to see us here until we see the money.
I'm here to urge that this committee establish a $1 million fund for pilot projects tied to the new Office of Climate Emergency Mobilization.
Our communities can't wait. Our planet can't wait.
In order for us to have a successful program, we need the funding.
The current proposed budget of $500,000 would cause severe underfunding.
I wanted to say that I understand that the work that you do here today is very hard, dealing with the competing requests for dollars.
I wanted to take this time to not only urge you to support the funding request for Right to Counsel, but to thank you for the time and consideration you have given all of the advocates.
There's plenty of opportunity for people to come down to the City Council chamber and offer their viewpoints and participate that way. And then people can always contact me directly at www.paulkrekorian.org.
And you definitely take that input very seriously. Let's talk a little bit about the mayor's proposed budget. And I know this year, as in other years, it prioritizes safety, including more support for police and fire departments. Now, we recently joined you for a test run of a new LAPD helicopter.
We still have helicopters that are vintage 2000, and that's just way too long to keep a police helicopter on the job.
Well, of course, public safety is the most important function of city government, and that value is reflected in our budget. If the police have good working helicopters with good communication system, this is a force multiplier. Same with the fire department. If we have up-to-date vehicles, if we have helicopters which are multi-use helicopters which can be used for water drops and also medical rescue, those are investments that we're making that have a direct return on investment in terms of the safety of the people.
Let's talk about the homeless issue. What about investments for the homeless?
It goes without saying that this is the issue that's paramount on everybody's mind right now.
This budget includes $457 million of investments in permanent housing, temporary shelter, services, and facilities to help homeless Angelenos. This is the largest investment the city has ever made to address the homelessness crisis.
The people of Los Angeles have invested by taxing themselves to help address this problem, and we're doing it. We're investing hundreds of millions of dollars in new housing, in bridge housing, in permanent supportive housing, in more domestic violence shelters, in many of the housing infrastructure that's necessary to address this problem.
Item 1, the only item on today's special agenda, is the continued consideration of the Budget and Finance Committee report relative to the Mayor's proposed 2019-20 budget for the city, related motions and resolutions.
At this time, I'd like to call on Mr. Krekorian to set the meeting up.
Good morning, members. Today is the day when we get to take up the end result, the work product of the Budget and Finance Committee that considered the Mayor's proposed budget over the course of 2 weeks, including 45 hours of hearings that included hearing from 40 city departments and bureaus and the receipt of more than 300 public comments.
As I listen to you, I realize how difficult a task this is and how important it is. Tell us about your decision making after you've heard everyone speak, all the budget hearings are over. What is it like to sit down with the other committee members and make those final decisions?
Well, the Budget and Finance Committee, in the years that I've chaired it, has really been blessed with members who are thoughtful, detail-oriented representatives of their constituencies. And so our debates have sometimes been robust, sometimes pointed, sometimes even heated, but the result of those debates and discussions has, I think, been a consensus around the priorities that really matter to the people of Los Angeles.
That actually concludes our work, members, on the budget. So thank you all very much for incredibly smooth process. I think this may
That's
have
where the round of applause.
May have broken our time record. Did this break our time record? So, it's especially important to put this budget, as easy as this seemed, into a larger context, Mr. President, because a few of us that I see around were here at a time when the city was literally teetering on the edge of bankruptcy.
When I took office in the council in 2010, we were facing some of the darkest financial times since the Great Depression. And in fact, former Mayor Reardon wrote an editorial for the Wall Street Journal saying that it was inevitable that the city would declare bankruptcy. And they might as well just go ahead and do it and get it over with. And we didn't take that advice. We went about the methodical, difficult effort at chipping away at that enormous budget deficit that the city was facing at that time, $1 billion projected budget deficit. We went from that point to a point where we now have not only a balanced budget, but we've eliminated almost the entire structural deficit.
This budget, for the first time in the city's history, has surpassed the $10 billion mark. And notably, the reserve fund in this year's budget has reached $409 million.
We have the strongest reserves that the city has ever had in its history.
When this process first began under his leadership, Mayor Reardon and other individuals within the city indicated that this city was headed towards bankruptcy. And they may very well have been correct. If it wasn't for your leadership if it wasn't for your creativity, if it wasn't for your work ethic, they could have been right. But thank God they were wrong. Let's give our Budget and Finance Chair the round of applause that he deserves.
Is there anything we haven't discussed today that we really need to know?
Well, I think I'm glad that you're doing this, because I think people should understand the process that goes into how we spend their tax money. People should be passionate about the budget. This has been great work. And with that, Mr. President, I think our work is done here.
Let's have another round of applause.
It's obvious that you have a real passion for making all of this work.
Well, you know, it's funny that you say that, because I didn't ask to be the budget chair. This was an assignment that was given to me, and it wasn't necessarily at the beginning the job that I most wanted to do in the council, because we were looking at pretty daunting budget times at the time. But Council President Wesson had confidence in my ability to do that. And over those years, I've come to realize that this is the most important work that we have, because everything that we do as a city is touched by our budget. It's been a real honor to be able to do this work. Slight oversight, Mr. President. We haven't yet voted on the budget. We voted.
And who reminded us of that? Sharon, maybe?
We voted on all the motions, but now, as amended, we need to vote on the Budget and Finance Committee's recommendations as amended.
Well, let's do that, okay? Let us open the roll, close the roll, tabulate.
13 ayes.
Now, just to make sure I'm sure, is there anything else
We're done.
that we have forgotten? All right, this meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Imagine this. You're a young girl living in the jungles of Los Angeles, California. You get in trouble at school and you know the consequences that you have to face once you go home, and you would much rather let it cool down before you decide to face these consequences. So you decide to leave home. A guy pulls up on the side and the window rolls down. He's smiling at you and he's asking you if you're okay. You say you're fine, and you start to walk away in mid-stride. He offers to let you sit in the car until the rain stops. So you're cold and wet, and you say, okay. Then you regain consciousness. You're waking up. Your body is filled with pain. It feels like your insides are being ripped out of you. You try to scream, and you can't, because every time that you try to, someone is hitting in your face repeatedly. And then you realize you've been kidnapped and you've been raped repeatedly by many different men. This was the first night that I was trafficked, and I was 12 years old.
It's a problem that impacts thousands of Angelenos, most of them women, many of them children. Today, the focus is on the fight against sex trafficking.
It is estimated that there are around 10,000 victims of sex trafficking here in the Los Angeles area. Southern California is a major hub for trafficking, and this is of U.S. citizens. So often it is believed that sex trafficking happens overseas, or only foreigners are trafficked into the United States, but this happens in our very own backyard.
How does the typical victim get pulled into this kind of activity?
The most common is a boyfriend. A boyfriend usually, goes about the regular courting. You're beautiful. I would like to get to know you better, and then something will change, and then that's when he will introduce trading sex for monies. The next thing that she knows, she's full blown into sex trafficking. That is just one way, or it could be that they come from a marginalized, poverty-stricken area, and they are looking for money to take care of their family.
So the average age of a child coerced into modern-day slavery or sex trafficking is 13 years old. Mm-hmm. And as Tika mentioned, oftentimes these children, young boys and girls, come from family situations where either their relatives are also prostitutes or pimps, or are no longer available to them to protect them and to watch for them. So the kids are left to their own devices. And a lot of these young girls are looking for a father figure. And here comes a boy that's a couple years older than them and starts to groom them.
How difficult is it for victims to break away from this lifestyle?
It's incredibly difficult. Oftentimes, when one of our participants in the past, when she was actually able to escape, oftentimes they go right back. And there's that vicious cycle again. It is because they have been so mentally manipulated that they feel like that is their family. They know that they're getting beaten, but then they start to feel like that's just commonplace. They know that it doesn't feel right to sell themselves, but that's just commonplace.
As you work with the survivors, what is something that you did not know?
One thing that's shocking to me is that they don't understand that they are victims. And then I started to think about my own story. I did not find out that I was a victim of human trafficking or a victim of anything until I was 33 years old. So I started in the life at the age of 12, got out of the life at the age of 23, and now here I am at 33 years old, and someone's telling me that I was a victim and I wasn't a criminal. And that's what a lot of the victims think. They think that they're more of criminals because they're engaging in prostitution, not understanding that the grooming process and having someone over them is victimization.
Let's turn the conversation now to your organization and what you do.
So our organization, in the beginning, worked primarily with survivors of sex trafficking. We've now expanded our populations to include women at risk of trafficking. These populations include those that are formerly incarcerated, survivors of domestic violence, and those that were previously homeless. And oftentimes our clients fit into every single category. So what we do at Two Wings, we offer a career development academy and a youth mentoring program.
I work as a crisis response case manager. I work very closely with LAPD in the stations. And when they're doing sting operations, I'm the one that's in the tanks talking to the girls, letting them know about our services, letting them know about the prostitution diversion program, about our connection with Two Wings, and being a living testimony of it. Going into Two Wings as a woman who wasn't really sure of her future, and now sitting on the board and letting them know about how amazing the program was.
Tell us a little bit more about the path to recovery and how long it can take.
The path to recovery, it's based off of the individual. What we consider successes could be something small for one client and something huge for another. It's just a matter of perception. For a client to come in who has been in the life for over 10 years, for her to stop being on the streets one day less, we celebrate that. For someone to get away from the prostitution part of it, we celebrate that. We look for what makes them feel good about themselves. As far as the Two Wings program, we ask them, what do you want? What do you want for your future? Where do you see yourself in a year? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Because we want to make sure that we are planting the seed for their own dreams and goals. It's not what we want, it's what the girls want.
What do you think we can do to change society's attitudes about sex trafficking?
Education. Before I started volunteering with Two Wings back in 2012, I didn't know that human trafficking or sex trafficking was a domestic issue. When I tell my friends what it is that I do, they didn't know. So it's still very much, and I think this term sex trafficking is still very much a new term that not everyone is aware of. So it's just having these conversations and spreading the word that it is very much a real domestic issue that we face.
People need to be more understanding. People need to be more empathetic. If they start to ask what happened to you instead of what's wrong with you, they will understand the stories behind these women, children, and also men and boys that have been victimized through human trafficking.